Thank you, guys. Please welcome our panel. They will introduce themselves with Rumman, our first speaker, to moderate.
All right.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rumman Chowdhury, speaker from earlier. Oh, is the mic on? There it is. I think it's on now. We good? Yes. So this is our education super panel, and as mentioned earlier, Catapult has a strong incentive to understand and shape the future of learning. So we've pulled together an amazing set of panelists today. I just want everyone to go around and introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Muriel Claussen. I work in the future of workspace, which we'll be talking about more later. But obviously, a big part of that is what are the skills that we're training for our future workforce, both in education systems, but also throughout the career. So I'm really excited to be here, and thanks for everyone who stuck around for the last session.
My name is Josh Foss. I am the Associate Dean of Graduate Studies at Minerva Schools. We're an online 4-year degree granting program specializing especially in fully active learning and foundational concepts and cognitive skills development.
So I'm Tharald Nustad. Tharald Nustad, I'm founder of Nordic Impact and Catapult, and we have a big focus on education, and we work with Ashoka on the vision of everyone on Changemaker, in addition to trying to transform future education.
Hi, my name's Ali. I am the co-founder of Recoded, which is, in essence, a coding bootcamp for conflict-affected youth, and we also help place them into jobs of the future.
Hello, I'm Ross Hall. I work with Ashoka, and our whole work is around helping everyone become a change maker.
Perfect. So just wanted to kick off with maybe a bit of a controversial question. So a bit of background is Catapult Learning first kicked off, I think it was like earlier this year. One of the things we do is offsites, meaning we pull together people in a local community, and we were in London for this, bring together people in the edtech community from all different aspects, put them in a room, have them tell us what their priorities are, what their challenges are, what their interests are. And we have a dinner afterwards, and one point of controversy that came up during the discussion is, can we create true educational change with our existing institutional structures, or do we need to create new ones? Do we just burn the old ones to the ground and recreate? Or is our existing education system so very broken that we can't do that? Or should we partner with them, with these institutions that have so much momentum, so much history, so much pedagogy, and elevate them for the future of education? So thoughts?
I'm happy to start us off. So I think that burning the ships is sometimes necessary, but there's actually a lot in the context of the current education system that we can really create a lot of value with. The problem, I think, is there's a foundational mindset shift that needs to happen. So the main thing that I see as the issue with our current education system, the thing I think that has to be looked at first, is that we have this kind of winner take all or have not mentality around education. So we actually think there's this difference in ability, and that people either perform well in that or they don't. They learn that effectively or they didn't. And all of our tests, all of our learning structures are designed around, did you succeed or did you not? So I was working in a laboratory where we actually worked with individuals with autism spectrum disorder. So these are people who have been diagnosed with a learning disability. And we saw through learning interventions over longitudinal studies that these people with learning disabilities actually had learning differences. When they were given the right type of education for who they were, there was incredible potential to be unlocked in all of them. And so if that's true for people who are diagnosed with learning disabilities, I think that's true for everyone in our education systems. So the more that we actually get at how can we help each person succeed, how they are individually, what their unique potential is, the better off we are. A great tool for this is technology. Here's one example. We now have an ability to look at microexpressions on a person's face and tell if they're comprehending what they read. So what if tests, instead of actually just scoring us on our intelligence or ability, actually helped us tailor our learning further, helped us see how we can help somebody be successful in that system?
It's interesting when you talk about the ideas of success. It seems to us at Ashoka that we actually need to fundamentally transform the very idea of what success means, where in the current system, which is very institutional and very mechanistic, of course, the prevailing idea of success is somebody who's getting certain academic credentials, is going on to university, is getting a job at McKinsey or whatever that might be, or maybe at the local garage if you're not lucky. And it seems to us that we need to fundamentally redefine the idea of success so that the idea of success is somebody who is fully empowered as a change maker, someone living for a better world. And from that question, then I think you can work back to the question as to what are institutions doing towards that idea of success, recognizing that institutions probably should be thought of as human systems, not as mechanistic systems.
Mm-hmm.
Should we burn the ships? There are many ships. Some of them, most of them are doing many virtuous things. I've been working in higher education for 10 years, so that was my go-to frame. In the U.S., we could talk about K-12 education, and globally, there's a lot more diversity. But to answer your question, I think there are some structures of the way higher education tends to work in the United States that, frankly, the focus is not on education, it's on research. And the incentive structures for professors is to get grants and not to do service to their students. So that probably needs to split off, and research needs to continue, but needs to be recognized, like what the incentive is and what the point of it is. Mm-hmm. The educational path needs to focus on the students. That part of it is broken. Some of the administrative structures, faculty senates, total autonomy in the classroom is actually a problem. Mm-hmm. So I think some of those structures need to be changed.
And you're speaking to exactly the reason why I left academia. So in my PhD program, the next step is to go into academia. What I learned is that there's no respect for people who love teaching, and I genuinely loved teaching and wanted to be a good teacher. And I was told I was wasting my time because my time should be spent incrementally advancing research by publishing semi-interesting papers, or papers that are interesting to me and the three people who do what I do, right? So my next question kind of piggybacks on that, and I will talk to the two of our technologists here. So how do we scale these solutions? So many of these solutions are very interpersonal. It is about human beings working with other human beings. It is about addressing the autism spectrum by deeply understanding a particular student. So as much as we may blame the current education system, the one thing it has been good at is scaling. The reason we have standardized tests is that they are standardized, right? So is it possible to scale? How might technology scale without losing that humanity? So Tharald, I'd like to pose that question to you first.
Well, I think that the big question is, what do we want people to learn, and how do they learn that? And for what we're doing at Catapult Education is to look through, like, from cradle to grave. You have to give people the right foundation with their little kids, and all the way through what they need to learn when they're older and in professional life. So, and we believe that that's something that our school system is built around the Industrial Revolution, the assembly, and doing the same thing more and more efficient. We believe in the future, the world is changing and changing faster and faster. So we need to create a humanity that is adaptable to see problems, mobilize together, be creative, and solve it with other people again and again and again. I think with that goal, I think technology can definitely help in many ways, being a scaling factor, but also personalized, individualized learning, to know where you are, what you need to learn at what time, and to use AI to see how you're doing, what level you are, how you can trigger better engagement learnings. But I think you also always need other people. Peer-to-peer learning is one of the most important parts of how you learn. And I think VR is also a super important element of how you can scale learning and make it so that you can feel, understand, and learn things better and faster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think when people think about scale, they often go from either the brick and mortar to the other extreme, which is all online learning. I don't necessarily believe that online learning is the most effective way, just standalone. I think that you really need what universities do is create like a network of support and community around you, which I think is really fundamental to the learning process. So I think there has to be a combination. I think to scale, we do need to integrate more technology, and that means trying to understand what skills we need to teach, how best to teach them. But I also think even if you have online platforms which are doing that to provide access to quality education in areas where there might not necessarily be access to quality education, you still need to combine that with some form of in-person support. And that can be done through a multitude of different ways, whether it's through mentorship or having, in-person meetups and stuff like that. I think it should be technology facilitated, but not just technology standalone to make sure that we can scale this and make sure that people are actually learning the skills that they need to succeed for the jobs of tomorrow.
So how have you seen that reflected in the community you're trying to address, the refugee community?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I think across the Middle East there is this culture that university education is the most important and it's critical for people to access that. So I think there is still an emphasis on people going to formal education, mainly for the accreditation, because I don't think that they're coming out with the skills that they need to actually access the job market. There's a big skills mismatch happening in formal education and the labour market, which I think we really need to start solving. Just anecdotally, in Turkey, 85% of graduates from the computer science faculty can't code. And for me, that's really shocking. I mean, if you're just learning theory but have no idea how to apply it, there is something fundamentally wrong going on in the education system. So we're not preparing people. And I think what we try and do at Recoded is we have a blended approach where we basically have online platforms where people can learn by doing, but they're in the classroom with practitioners applying all of that learning and getting support to answer questions which you can't necessarily do just through an online platform per se. And then I think people often learn best by doing, so actually giving them real projects is really critically important to be able to test out what do you know, and just building the skill to actually learn is something I think that we take for granted a lot of the time. It's actually a skill that I think we fail to teach, but something that is probably one of the best things we can give students is how to go and find research or get the answers that they need just on their own.
Absolutely. And one thing that you've sort of touched on, and I think both Minerva and Ashoka talk about this, is education means more than just paper, pen, rote learning. It's more than mathematics and literature and that kind of thing. So from the two of your perspectives, how have you incorporated an expanded idea of education, and how might you think of education maybe differently today and for the future economy than possibly the way we've been thinking about education in the past?
Well, at Minerva, our approach was to try to think of generalizable skills and core competencies that would be applicable regardless of your career, and try to be as explicit and principled as we could about articulating those in a way that they could actually be assessed. So, for example, critical thinking, everybody thinks is important. Turns out you can't actually assess critical thinking. It's too heterogeneous a skill. It consists of multiple sub-competencies like problem solving, evaluating claims, evaluating justifications, and so on. So what we did is exploded out this competency into learning outcomes that we could articulate to students in a very transparent way. Here is the skill that is about understanding correlations. They're not the same as causations. There's a mathematics behind it. And then one of the best practices in education is provide rubrics for your assessment. So what does it actually mean to do it poorly or reasonably or very well? We developed rubrics for all of our learning outcomes, and we publish this to the students before their class. And in fact, it's the only thing that we assess at Minerva. We don't give any holistic scores. So if a student writes a paragraph, they'll see the hashtag learning outcome that the professor had some bit of feedback about. So in some, it's about a clear articulation of very specific and very measurable learning outcomes that are generalizable regardless of career.
Right, and the other half of that is the work that Ashoka does, which is about creating a global citizen, a change maker. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so this is essentially, I don't think, conflicting with you, but complementing this idea. You know, the primary focus in education currently everywhere is the acquisition of knowledge. And what we're recognizing is that for somebody to be a change maker, it means being a change maker. So we're really focused on the human being and those really deep human qualities that define the extent to which a person is being for a better world. And therefore, we're essentially trying to redefine the idea of learning to an idea around becoming a change maker. And this seems to be really helpful, and it sounds a bit pedantic, I accept, but it's very helpful in conversations when you can get people to talk and think about what does it mean to become a change maker. So learning to become empathic, for example, learning to become creative, all of these really deep human qualities that shift us from a world of developing machine skills to developing human beings.
Mm-hmm. And these are things that we've sort of assumed that people pick up over life, which are actually acquired and learned, and we're not explicitly doing it. So that's brilliant. And that leads to this idea of accessibility and all of these future skills that, frankly, right now, it's the 1%. We can take advantage of it. We understand, we have the networks, we have the accessibility. So how do we achieve our obligation of making this available to a global community? If we are literally here to achieve this post-scarcity society, this world in which everybody's a flourishing human being, it is not just about the people of Norway, the people in the US and the 1%. How do we reach out to the communities that, you know, there is people who don't even know what they don't know. They don't even understand that there's this other world that exists. How do we welcome them, invite them, and hear their voices as well? So I'll open that out to the group.
Happy to jump in on that. So I think that one of the speakers earlier talked about how some people specifically target the problem with their entrepreneurial efforts, but other people kind of provide frameworks that others can work on top of. And I actually think if we're talking about something like education, there are really local solutions needed. There are people that really understand on the ground what the needs in their community are that are going to be the best change makers on this. So if you are somebody who maybe comes from a privileged background, you've had the opportunity to learn, okay, what are the things that are going to be important in this new context? How do we help develop these soft skills, which I like to call power skills? I actually think that's what they are. How do we actually give them a platform, give them a framework, give them something that makes it easier for them to build those tools that can be more local? I think any of those kind of intermediary type of projects are really interesting right now. Platforms, anything that allows someone to have a kind of structured database that informs their online education platform or something like that. And another point here that is important is I think we shouldn't just see technology as a way to digitize traditional education. Technology as a tool to totally revamp it if we want to, or to really stretch what we think about what it can even do. So I think also partnering with people in local communities, figuring out what are actually the values, what are the real needs that you have, and then thinking really creatively about applying technologies in those ways.
I mean, I have a short answer. I don't know. There's a bootstrapping problem. I find it sort of tragic that the sort of go-to answer for maybe a sort of tech crowd is online. Like, figure out some way of providing online education. But
Right.
there's 3 billion people for whom that's completely irrelevant.
Right.
So I have no idea. I have no idea how you
No
actually lift them up. I mean, I can imagine a kind of a conversation that's about distributing materials, micro-libraries, but micro-libraries that include a sort of self-bootstrapping kit about here's how you can teach yourself the stuff that's in the other books. Mm-hmm. You know, so if there's no instructor on site, but that's just, I'm making that up on the spot.
Right. And then there's so they've achieved this education, but as somebody pointed out, it's not about education for education's sake. It's not about acquiring knowledge. It's about being able to action on that knowledge. Then we have to, how do we build that next step? And I think that's one of the parts of Recoded that's so brilliant, is that it's not just about giving us education and goodbye, now you're able to marginally code, but hey, there's no coding jobs, right?
Yeah.
So what's the second half of linking to the future economy?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question because I think this is, when we think about the purpose of learning a skill or educating ourselves, I think fundamentally it's to learn something that we can then apply in the labor market, right? And it is a real challenge in large parts of the world where you have economies that are restrictive in some way. So whether it's through, for a lot of refugees, living in contexts where they don't have work rights. How do you overcome that? How do you teach a skill that enables someone to actually transcend the geographic location that they are and actually work in the digital economy? And it's something that I think we're all trying to grapple with at the moment. How do you go from that path to learning to actually succeeding in the economy, earning an income? And I think that's one of the large benefits of living in a digitally connected world where if you give someone a laptop and an internet connection, then you're actually teaching them a skill that enables them to get that first step. It can really be life-changing. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's just about teaching people to code. I think there are so many opportunities that are available out there with simple skill sets. We work with a partner that basically links refugees who have a language ability to people that want to learn Arabic as conversation partners. And I think just being able to use a skill that you already have to be able to earn an income is incredibly powerful. Or one of our students created an application which linked people who were illiterate with AI and machine learning companies that need image validation on their mobile phones. And I think being able to use whatever you have in your hands to be able to earn an income is incredibly powerful. And whether that's learning a simple skill like being able to identify an object on your mobile phone and then get paid on your mobile phone is what will actually start to transform economies and communities at large. And I think that tends to have a multiplier effect that we need to start thinking about through systems change and the way that we're actually applying some of these solutions in intractable situations. Because I think what we fail to remember is that these are not short-term issues. People are often displaced for an average 17 to 20 years. So if you're not providing them with the skill set that enables them to then go on to an opportunity, really leaving generations behind, and that's problematic for countries to develop, regions to develop, and we all, know what happens when that doesn't happen right.
Right, absolutely. And you touched on something earlier about coding. So the World Economic Forum has defined what skills we need to succeed in the current workforce and the future workforce. And to me, one of the most notable things is one of the skills that's not on there is programming. And yet we see so many things popping up like girls in STEM, coding boot camps for minorities, et cetera. And it seems to be kind of a catch-all thing to say, oh, hey, teach people how to code and then something, right? So, do we think that's misguided? Do we think it needs better guidance or different guidance? What are thoughts on this strong push for AI, STEM, et cetera, as the sort of the panacea for all of our future work problems? Tharald, yeah?
I think that, long-term coding is going to be done by AI, and this is not the most important skill to know. But I think short-term, it does give insight into the digital economy and what you can do and doing skilled work that you can do across the world. So I think it's a good start to get people into digital economy. Long term, I would say teaching kids to code is probably not it's a way of teaching reasoning, logic, which is good. But I believe that, as I said, the most important thing is to teach kids to have empathy, creativity, collaboration skills, growth mindset, curiosity, things like that can make them able to solve problems. I think that's needed both in future kids and in future corporate leaders. If you don't have those skills, you can't adapt and follow, and really your business will die. So,
yeah.
I want to second that. Sorry. Yeah, I think you're right. I think software is probably not going to be written by people for much longer, and it's possible that none of us in the room can really anticipate what the jobs are going to be in 30 years. So how do you deal with that? How do you train students for jobs that don't exist yet? The only thing I think you can do is help them develop generalizable cognitive toolkits. And not just intellectual sort of brainiac stuff, but effective interaction, being able to communicate well. And these are non-trivial skills. Most people think that it's just sort of their birthright by being a human. It's not so. There's body language to consider. There's effective use of language and non-linguistic communication. There's understanding diversity in teams and ethics and all of those things. Those will translate into, regardless of whether we're mining asteroids or picking plums that grow off our dogs. So whatever the jobs are, that we can just develop human capacities better.
So another component of that, though, is if we look at the long-term time horizon, yes, I think we can all agree that coding is probably not the most important skill to have. But right now we're facing a time where coding is building the bedrock of our society, and it's really important that all the voices are represented in that. It can't just be maybe a traditional technologist. Like, we do need more women. We need more people from underrepresented populations who are engaged as well. So I think it's an important stepping stone. That's why I believe that it's still good that we're encouraging that type of education. But I also think there's another layer of encouraging people to think about, how do we actually use this tool in an ethical way? How do we actually use this tool to solve problems? How are we actually applying it? And train people not just to necessarily have a literacy in performing that task, but also what is that like next order thinking? And I think that's what's not so automatable, is like how we're actually directing that type of talent, whether it's a human doing that or AI.
Yeah.
It's interesting listening to this conversation and reflecting on this idea that ultimately change has to happen at the level of the individual person who is becoming empowered to live for a better world. So it's got to happen at the really sort of micro level and at the community level. And I look at the WF report, and it's another list coming from on high, which seems to be incomplete. And I wonder where it's meant to go. I'm not quite sure where it's meant to land in real communities. And it seems to me it's the essence that we ultimately have to get to is to be having this kind of conversation in communities with young people, getting them engaged in the conversation. What are the skills I need in order to make my world a better place? And I think unless we get there, we're going to continue to produce these long lists and these top-down approaches, which I think will never take hold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really agree with everything that has been mentioned. I think it is definitely a skill that will probably be automated in the future, and I think we need to also double down on all the really human elements, because I think that's where we're moving towards in the future, how to fuse technology with all of these very, very human things that makes us who we are, creativity, empathy, and how does that interact with technology. But I also agree with Muriel that we really need a base level of understanding and that foundation built, and that's not going to happen if people are being left out of the puzzle right now in terms of skills and understanding how it works and how to build technology. And that's certainly something I think we take for granted in the communities that we live in. In a lot of refugee communities, people are struggling to understand how to use a computer, just use it, not even code. And I think if we don't sort of start bridging that divide with actually how to use technology, let alone build it, we're not going to start creating local solutions and local change makers that really understand how to transform their communities, and leaving them out of the picture and having this top-down approach is not going to be great for anyone in terms of the technology and the way we move forward with all these solutions.
I think that's a really wonderful sentiment to end on, and thank you all, Super Panel.
Thank you.
Thanks.